case. Um, Thank you. Recording in progress. I will click on OK. And so here, at least in the West, we tend to still be a bit of a grief illiterate and death denying society. And I had the honor early on in my life of learning about grief the hard way, but also being supported by incredible teachers and mentors. So I want to say, any wisdom that you received tonight comes from my ancestors, and I really want to lift them up. The hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that I've journeyed with, and people I've walked with to end of life and been with a companion on the grief journey, they've all been my greatest teachers. And I'm so honored to have been invited to update and present this resource for BFO-Toronto, an organization that is very near and dear to my heart. So thank you. And we really hope this is going to be a helpful resource for both paid and unpaid workers from lots of different kinds of organizations who are going to be working with grieving seniors. And BFO included seniors in the development of the material. And we, of course, would love your feedback on it. And Ashley will send you more information about that. So these self-directed learning modules, as Ashley said, were initially created in 2020, but because of COVID and everything, changed. They've just recently been kind of revitalized, and we want to give our thanks to New Horizons, which is a program of the Government of Canada for funding this project. So here we go. So I want to acknowledge that even though we're here tonight as service providers who wish to expand our knowledge and toolbox for working with grieving seniors, we're also here as humans with our own history of losses, our own stories. And so it's normal and natural when we're talking about grief that you may be reminded of your own. So I just want to normalize that for folks. So just, pause, take a breath, and just let yourself be here in this moment. If you can, kind of let go of whatever worries and to-do lists and things that may be distracting you, and just, give yourself the gift of being able to be present for the next couple of hours for what is going to unfold. In my ongoing pursuit to normalize talking about and acknowledging our collective loss experiences, I always like to start my presentations by lighting a candle. And the invitation is for you to just take a moment to privately reflect on anyone or anything whose presence that you might be aware of in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, or your body right now. You don't have to do anything about it. Just notice it, let it come into your awareness and honor it. As I always do at the beginning of sessions, I'm holding a grounding stone that I received many, many years ago from a friend when I was working in the HIV and AIDS sector. And I always honor Wilf when I start these trainings. And so tonight, I may jump in and remind us all to take a breath, because the breath is a really powerful tool to help ground us in what I call embodied presence. And embodied presence is exactly what we want to bring to the grieving people that we're companioning. So just continuing from this place of grounded mindfulness, I want to open our gathering also with a land appreciation. And I learned something from Talia Michelle Nahaney, who's a Squamish decolonial scholar and facilitator out west. And she talks about land acknowledgement or territory acknowledgement as a personal commitment to and appreciation for the land that we're in relations with. And I love that. The land, not the land that we are on, that we own, that we live in, but that we are in relations with. And so she calls settlers into a deeper understanding of the practice, which is really about appreciation and recognition and being in good relations, not just with the land, but with one another. And so this is an act of reconciliation, taking this moment to pause and reflect and help us seek to understand our place within the history of how we all arrived here on this land, many by choice, some by force, and otherwise. It's a time to recognize that people come from all over the world, that the The legacy of slavery and forced migration and displacement impacts each one of us differently, just as being descendants of settlers or colonizers assigns a different accountability. So this is about acknowledging what happened in the past, but also reflecting on what changes can be made moving forward to further the reconciliation process. And this isn't just a historical act. Unfortunately, we know that colonialism and genocide and anti-BIPOC racism are enacted still in current and ongoing ways. So we need to build our mindful participation, mindfulness of our participation in those systems. And for me, growing up, I wasn't taught about the true history of Canada's relationship with Indigenous people, and the current and ongoing harms that have been enacted. And it's a hard truth to accept, but we are all able to live and work and thrive on this land as a direct result of our governments and our churches stealing the land that belonged to the original people. People who actually consider us all guests on the land, that nobody really owns her. And as I said earlier, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people really believe that people are of the land and the land is of the people, and it's about that reciprocal relationship. So just invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes or just to lower your gaze as we all just take a moment and pause and reflect on our presence and our connection to one another, to the purpose of our gathering tonight, to our ancestors, to the land that we live on, to whatever source of strength we draw from, and to all living things we share the planet with. And just bringing your attention to your breath. You don't have to change it in any way. Just let your shoulders drop. Let yourself become aware of your presence in this moment. Acknowledging just how you're doing right now. And then bringing your awareness to the touch of your body on your seat. And tracking that awareness down through your legs, down into the foundation of whatever dwelling you're in, and out into the land below and around you. You're just continuing to breathe. Let your awareness spread out across maybe the grassy lands that have been uncovered in the last couple of days, maybe still snowy, icy sidewalks. Maybe you have to imagine the land underneath the concrete. Do you have trees near where you are? Bodies of water? Just breathe into that connection to this land that holds all of us. And we want to appreciate the traditional lands each one of us are on, and lift up the stories of the nations and people and communities that have formed on this land, their histories, their traditions, and their resilience and relentlessness in the face of ongoing grief and loss. You can just take a moment to privately honor or name the first people whose land you're on, and reflect on the ways that you can keep this mindfulness alive in you. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the Zoom room. Thank you for being with me in that. I'll just end by saying that we're all very grateful to work and live and journey and remember and heal together on this land, and acknowledge that it is the unceded and ancestral territory of many nations. And I would just encourage all of us to continue learning and unlearning about our relationship with the land and with Indigenous people and with reconciliation. And I've included some resources at the end of the slide deck for you to dive a little bit more deeply if that's what you would like to do. So loss and grief and bereavement are major factors in most people's lives as they age. But as I said earlier, in general, most of us aren't really educated about grief. And even though loss is a common human experience, I remember vividly, I was saying this to Ashley earlier, it can feel like you've been parachuted into a landscape with no compass, no maps, where a language is spoken that's foreign to you. And so I always say it's a journey to travel with heart. Um, there's lots of blind curves ahead on the journey of grief. Um, and these resources that we've created for you hopefully will prepare you to be with seniors who are experiencing loss and who are grieving. And we hope that by giving you some information and tools to help you better navigate this often confusing and unpredictable journey, we hope that the people that you're with will feel better supported and companioned. Um, and the resources are intended for peer support volunteers, for staff, for folks who work in community service agencies, long-term care, assisted living, any really health or social service environment where you might encounter a grieving senior, maybe even in your family or circle of friends. Some of the material will be a refresher, and some may be new to you. And some of this material, of course, will apply to adult grievers of all ages. I'll just be introducing you to a few bits and pieces of the content, just a taste. I think there's over 90 slides in the resource. So even though I am notorious for putting way too much into my presentations, we're not going to get to everything. There's going to be more resources created, as Ashley said, and she'll let you know about that. But I'm going to start with one of my favorite things about Zoom, and that is using the breakout rooms. I feel so powerful when I do this. I'm sure that you have all experienced being put into a breakout room. This is just an opportunity to connect with a couple of other folks who are here tonight. And just for 5 minutes, nothing too intense. And you can share whatever you're comfortable with. And it's really about just saying hi, this is who you are, where you come from, like what's your role, and maybe what your level of grief awareness is coming in tonight. And before I send you off, I want to just thank you, Ashley. The learning resource itself is comprised of self-directed learning modules, a downloadable workbook, and additional resources to help folks continue their learning. And so we broke the information down into sort of bite-size, easy to digest modules. And there are, on each page, there will be, sorry, let me just get rid of this. There's always, there we go. There's a home button on every slide that'll take you back to this table of contents, and you'll be able to click on whichever section you want to work on. And again, it sort of starts with the first few are some of the basics about grief and some information about different ways that grief shows up in folks, some important knowledge and frameworks for working with folks, and then moving more into the specifics for how grieving seniors might things that grieving seniors might be facing, what support can look like. And of course, the most important thing is building resilience and self-care for you as a worker. So you'll have lots of time to dive into the material once it's up on the website. This is sort of the template, and it'll look like this. It starts off with a brief video, which I'm not going to show because you're a fairly grief literate group, but I just want to start by saying, grief is a huge and evolving field. And so we're going to do our best in this resource to give people some good foundational knowledge. And there's always going to be new information coming up. So as I said, in the first few modules, we'll be looking at our role as service providers, the basics of grief, some frameworks for working with grief. And then in later modules, you'll learn more about the senior specific work. Something that's really important to me to talk about is my teaching and belief that in order to show up effectively for seniors who are grieving, really effectively for anyone, we need to keep in mind 3 important ways of being with someone in a supportive capacity. And so it's about effective engagement, and it requires us to have 3 things: embodied presence, which means that we show up grounded and present in our bodies, minds, and hearts. and it requires us to be mindful and in the moment. And it also means that we have to show up well. And so that's why the importance of self-care is a part of this work. And I wanted to introduce that right up front as a core competency. And then self-awareness, in this moment, how am I relating to my own grief experience? And this is especially true for peer support workers. Companioning someone on a grief journey will naturally invite our own stories to arise. And so who or what might we be aware of that we're carrying into the encounter? And then finally, acknowledgement. I really believe that we need to build the muscle of being present in the face of suffering. We need to be able to hold space for people that are grieving. And when I say hold space, I mean, allowing for all of the person's experiences and thoughts and feelings to be expressed without us feeling like we need to move to fix or change them or their experience. And I think that that's a practice that, requires work. That's why I talk about it like building a muscle. So engagement. And so now's the time that you'd be prompted on the resource to open up your workbook and spend a few minutes in self-reflection, but you can just use whatever you have in front of you to take some notes. It's just an opportunity to think about what grief means to you. Like, what is this thing called grief? So just take a few moments now to jot down some words or phrases to describe your understanding of grief. Just give it another few seconds. That's great. So here's my question. How does this image resonate with you and your reflections on what grief is to you? This is how we want grief to work. Nice and tidy, beginning, middle, and end, straight line. And this is actually how it works. It's like the cat got into the ball of wool and made a total mess of things. So just give me a thumbs up or a heart on your reactions if this image resonates with you. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Yeah. And I think that's partly why we want to give you some, basic information right up front to help untangle that ball a little bit. And the reason that we talk about the importance of self-awareness and spending time in reflection is because grief is something that you're going to encounter both in yourself and in the people that you're serving. It's not one or the other. They kind of come as a package. I mentioned earlier in my ongoing pursuit to normalize talking about grief and loss, I've created an Instagram account. It's called Grief Truths. Feel free to follow me. And I did this because I think it's so important for people to become grief aware, to be exposed to little bits of information, quotes about grief, that will help them in their own journeys, as well as when they might be called on to companion a friend, family member, or client in grief. So just, I think the most important number one truth is that grief is not a problem to be fixed. It's an experience we all share by virtue of being human. And so these are some of the things that I think we need to have in our grief-aware toolkit. So you want tools to understand what is happening with folks and what is this thing called grief, which again, I think a lot of you are intimately familiar with. And you also want to know what is needed to support someone effectively and respond well to the diversity of grief experiences and responses that you'll encounter. And so that includes making sure that your knowledge is current. We don't really talk about the 5 stages of grief anymore. Thank you, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. God bless you. She really was a pioneer in bringing grief to public awareness, but we have updated our understanding of grief since 1967. So for those of you who use the term 5 stages of grief, I'm asking you humbly to find new language. And also you want to make sure that you're aware of your own relationship to grief and how to take care of yourself. Because in every moment of, sitting with and journeying with a bereaved person, our own story may show up. And so we need to be aware of that. You need to kind of know where you are and where your client begins, and you have clear boundaries so that you can maintain your own wellness in the work. And of course, it's really important to put grief in context and give some foundational information, starting with, we can't talk about grief and loss without first talking about attachment. So we attach because we're human, and our attachments are both tangible and intangible. And when we lose something or someone that we're attached to, we grieve. And we don't just grieve death-related losses. So tangible losses are the people, places, and things that we lose, and intangible losses are psychological losses, are more like hopes and dreams and expectations. And I think especially working with seniors, but generally speaking, it's really important to know that grief arises from both death and non-death related losses. So, and some examples of non-death related loss would be, any change in your place or status. So getting a divorce, losing your job, immigrating. For anyone who's on a serious illness journey, they're going to experience grief of all kinds, including their own loss of independence and mobility and identity, and also the anticipatory loss of connections to loved ones. You can think of it as someone saying, who's living with a life-limiting illness, I'm losing parts of me on the journey. And for the caregiver of someone whose health status has changed, there's all kinds of losses, both the real-time losses and also the anticipatory ones. And many of the seniors that we encounter have had the experience of being a caregiver. So it's really important to keep that in mind. There's also losses that are related to our sense of identity and belonging. So when there is a mental health diagnosis or an HIV diagnosis, the ending of a relationship, the refugee experience, these all are connected to that sense of belonging and identity. And for many folks, and some of you who've experienced out-of-time losses know this, there's something called the shattering of an assumptive world. And that could include things like accidents and natural disasters and other traumatic experiences. I think COVID kind of put us all through the world, all through the shattering of the assumptive world. And then there's the grief from ancillary or secondary losses. And that refers to often the unspoken additional losses that accompany a primary loss. So you lose the person, but you also lose your relationship with them, the roles in the family that change, support systems change, identity, purpose, social support, all kinds of things. You lose your dreams for the future. Sometimes you lose your sense of history in the past. And I always like to say that even positive changes can evoke grief, my best friend's daughter went off to university, and they were so excited that she was launched in the world. And then they went, oh my God, there's nobody in the house anymore. So it's like a happy change, and it's also evokes grief. And We always say that grief is a unique experience for every person and every loss. But there are some sort of universal truths. So we also include them in the resource. So as I said, grief is a normal, natural part of the human experience, although it is painful and disruptive. It's also important to know that grief isn't just a feeling, but it is an experience. And it's a process, not an event. The loss is the event, and the grief is what arises as a result of the loss. Grief also affects us holistically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Grief has no timetable and is not linear, as that image showed earlier. It's more like a spiral where we kind of revisit the experience of loss from different perspectives and points of time in our lives, which is why we've evolved beyond the stages model of grief. Grief is also something for which we don't attain closure or recover or get over. Instead, the language that I like to use is we integrate the loss, metabolize the loss, accommodate for the loss in a way that helps us learn to live with grief in a healthy way. And also another truth is that a major loss tends to resurrect the thoughts and feelings and memories of former losses for the mourner, and that's especially true for seniors. We also go into some detail in the resource about the determinants of grief, but we're not going to do that tonight, but it is a continuation. We also take some time to debunk some of the myths about grief. So this is one of them. As I said, grief is normal and natural, but it's disruptive and traumatic. And I think what's really important to remember is that we experience dysregulation as a result of grief at all levels of our being. And so something important to understand when we talk about grief being a holistic experience is that we attach with our whole beings, so we grieve with our whole beings. And there's several slides in the resource that kind of break down in more detail how grief impacts people physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And that's really important when you're working with someone who may be having a very different experience of grief than you did, because some things won't be recognizable to you. We also address all the other common myths and misconceptions about grief, and we also look at Warden's tasks of mourning, which is the model that BFO uses, and other things. The general consensus, though, we've all heard that expression, time heals all wounds. And it's a myth that grief kind of resolves over time. It's actually more like this. People think that grief slowly gets smaller with time, but in reality, grief stays the same size and slowly life begins to grow around it. And I'm sure that that's something that you can all relate to intimately. So this is another direct slide from the resource. And it's really about kind of wrapping up what is required to support a grieving person in their unique experience. So whether you're a paid or unpaid worker, I think these are the key things that you can offer to a bereaved person. So your grounded embodied presence, number one, respect, patience, and empathy for the uniqueness of the grief experience. Again, holding space without judgment or needing to fix it or make it better. Being able to recognize those diverse responses to grief that may be different from how we respond to grief. And some language and frameworks for understanding the grief experience, space, time, compassion, obviously, and deep listening, right? Respecting the silence and not underestimating the power of presence. And of course, guidance in working through the tasks of mourning. So I know that was a very fast journey through the first part of the modules. Just going to ask if there are any questions or any comments about any of the material that we've covered so far. And I'll stop sharing so we can all see ourselves. Larry.
Betty Ann, you said that we don't talk about stages anymore. So how do you frame that? How do you say that?
Good question. So in the resource, it goes into more detail about the different sort of the way that the models of grief work have evolved. And so, like with Warden's Tasks of Mourning, we talk about the work of grief or working through grief. And we don't attach it to a checklist or stages so that people, one of the things that I learned many, many years ago is that if I set myself up that I need to just go through these 5 stages and then I'm good, what happens when I find myself back in stage 3, right? So rather than saying stages, we talk about the work of grief. And that work is going to change over time. And again, we're going to revisit it from different vantage points. Does that help, Larry?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any important sort of truths about grief that that you want to make sure we've got covered in the resource? Because I really didn't show you very, very much. But are you sitting there thinking, what about this, Betty Ann? Okay. Derek.
One thing I've learned is that there's no use in trying to compare one person's grief with another. Which is worse? Well, the answer is, of course, the one that you're enduring right now.
Amen. Thank you for sharing that, Derek. I used to say that at the beginning of the grief groups we did at BFO. There's no such thing as the worst loss. The worst loss is the one that you're carrying and facing right now. So thank you for that. Janet. Janet, you have your hand up?
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One thing that really stays with me is how one can just be sometimes blindsided because these very sometimes intense feelings of grief can just come out of nowhere and can be evoked by just the most inane, or for lack of a better word, just it can be triggered by, and I know I'm not supposed to use the word triggered, but it can be brought on by something that you least expect.
Absolutely.
I'll give, yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. And that's actually in the resource. And there's an actual researched term for that. It's called a STUG, a sudden temporary upsurge of grief. And Therese Rando, who's a leading grief researcher in the States, coined that term. I met her once at a conference a few years ago, and I fangirled all over her. I started to cry. I said, STUG was the most helpful thing I ever learned as a bereaved person, that it's totally normal, 10 years after the loss, to get a hit of grief and feel like you're quote unquote back in the beginning. And learning the language of STUGs. I actually wrote an article on my blog about it. Called it STUG, the 4-letter word that saved my life. So, and Ashley's putting an article in the chat about STUGs. So thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments, questions? All right. Well, I didn't share this at the beginning, but I'm going to give you a little 5-minute stretch break.
I love that picture so much, Betty.
So I'm just going to turn my camera off, and when I turn it back on, we will reconvene. In the next couple of modules, we add another layer of information that looks at the specifics of senior situations and how they contribute to the practice of supporting grieving seniors. This will be one of the slides that you'll see in the resource. So grief and loss may be different for seniors compared to younger adults because of a range of factors, and we've sort of tried to highlight most of them. First and foremost, accumulated life losses. So some of you may know this from personal experience. Seniors have built deep connections with family and friends for decades, as well as careers and hobbies and other interests. And these bonds are crucial to our quality of life. And when they're severed, again, those non-death related attachments, when they're broken, it inevitably results in grief. And then secondary losses, especially when an older adult loses a partner, it may cause additional repercussions, loss of financial security, loss of a best friend. I find the sad irony of supporting a grieving spouse is that the one person that you would turn to support you in your difficulty is the person who's gone. And then, social contacts and social networks also tend to change. And just generally increased isolation as the people in our networks age and die. Seniors might actually lack the necessary social support to help them in their grieving. And that isolation and loneliness, which is so pervasive in older people, becomes more intense when someone they love dies. And we know that social isolation drastically increases the risk of premature death from every cause. There's research around that. In fact, the risk is presented as being similar in magnitude to that of obesity, smoking, lack of access to healthcare, and physical inactivity. So the impact of loneliness, I think we all learned a lot about that during COVID. Then there's physical health concerns. So, grief often has an impact on physical health at any age, but older people are at a much higher risk for severe health problems due to the increased stress levels, combined with any current health issues they might be dealing with, and of course, the natural physical aging process. And then physical health issues might also make it difficult or prevent someone from being able to participate in the activities that would be helping them cope with their grief. There's always the potential for cognitive decline. Confusion is a common effect of grief for people of all ages, but for an older person, this can be more intense, and it can include forgetfulness and disorientation and disorganization. And it's hard to kind of know how much of that is grief related or would have been there anyway, but it's definitely exacerbated. And then finally, just a heightened sense of people's mortality. So the loss of a loved one can sharply remind all of us of our own mortality. But for seniors, it can lead to, increased anxiety about their own and fear about their own impending death. And then another kind of part of that, area of loss for older folks is the loss of cultural icons and people in public life. So, world leaders and actors and fictional characters that, when they die, it serves to remind us as, sort of constant reminder of loss and mortality. Every year when I watch the Oscars or the Emmys or the Grammys, I hold my breath for the in memorial section because I think, oh God, who died this year, right? And that's just compounded for older folks. And some other factors that are senior specific that might impact the grief experience. And we touched on some of these earlier when we spoke about non-death related loss. So losses and life changes of all kinds. Retirement, moving, having to move into long-term care, losing friends and hobbies. That's all inevitable as we age. And then the natural aging process will bring, some loss of independence and physical strength. Again, that idea of every loss we experience resurrects the old, feelings and experiences of old losses. That's certainly true for older adults as well. There's the grief related to, just the loss of ability to function, or, you know, ways of making meaning in our lives. Often aging comes with feeling a sense of purposelessness and a search for, ways to make meaning. So really anything that a person has invested their time and emotions and attention and energy and dreams, anything that's lost is going to lead to grieving those losses. And even though the losses might not be unexpected, the accumulation of loss can sometimes lead to bereavement overload, or cumulative grief is another term. It might be that multiple loss happens in a short period of time, or it just may be that it builds over years. And we know sometimes as we age, our resilience can diminish as well. There's also a really high degree of anticipatory grief with aging seniors because, again, people are watching their friends age and develop illnesses, and then of course, if they receive a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or other kinds of cognitive impairment, there's anticipatory grief about what that's going to look like. So those are all very specific, and some of you may be able to relate to them. Another non-death related loss that seniors face is how they're treated. So ageism is the stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination that happens based on age, and that harms people's health and well-being. And the media, portrays seniors in ways that influence how capable and confident we might think they are. And this sort of unconscious bias can show up in how we treat seniors. And we cover some of that in the modules as well. So in order to counter these messages and ensure that they don't impact how we support seniors, we need to maintain that awareness of ageism and how prevalent it is. And part of that means choosing terminology and language intentionally that promotes a respectful and positive attitude towards older adults. Not making assumptions, based on a person's age goes a long way in preventing and countering ageism. And I want to say that, we talk a lot in the helping profession about being non-judgmental. And I've always said, and Larry, you've heard me say this many times, I think it's an impossible goal to set for ourselves to be non-judgmental. Judging is part of being human, right? So I think we set ourselves up for failure if we say, I am going to provide non-judgmental, person-centered care. Instead, I'd really like to encourage us all to work towards being more aware of our unconscious judgments. So it's about being judgment aware, not non-judgmental, because again, we're surrounded by all of the messages in the world about, how to think about, our elders. And that's going to be different, from culture to culture, from family to family, but we are going to take in some of those ageist and negative stereotypes. So when they pop up, don't beat yourself up and say, oh my God, I was supposed to be non-judgmental. Just say, oh, I'm aware that I've got a judgment coming up, and how can I kind of put that aside so I don't let it interfere with how I'm going to relate to this person. And, we all know that older adults can live very full and vibrant and purposeful lives. So we need to really, make sure that we see people, even when they're diminished by grief, we see them in their full human capacity. So we know that seniors' needs are profound and complex, and usually involve many changes and resulting losses and grief. And I really want to emphasize how crucial the role of volunteers and family and friends and health and social service workers is in providing good grief care, good grief support. And so in the final modules of the resource, we take a look at the core competencies that we all need to have for providing that good care and support, the importance of self-awareness and self-reflection. And that's an ongoing thing, right? It's not just a one and done. How you feel about grief tonight, what you wrote down about your understanding of grief, that's going to look different a month from now, or maybe even tomorrow. So that ongoing self-reflection and self-awareness. We also look at the concepts of empathy versus sympathy, really important. The companioning model, which comes from Alan Wolfelt, and also the importance of acknowledgement. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And, you know, again, and I sometimes sound like a broken record, but I think it's so important, the vital role that self-care plays for service providers. And then we wrap up the resource by looking at the next steps in our learning journey and capacity building. So I think it's important to remember that we each have a unique set of lenses through which we see the world. Some of us have literal lenses. Some of us have metaphorical lenses. Anais Nin said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And so all of us have various social locations, social identities, and life experiences that, you know, inform the lenses and have contributed to our understanding and our beliefs about grief. So when we talk about self-awareness and self-reflection, it's really good to reflect on these questions. We don't have time right now, but there is an exercise in the book and we could take a couple of minutes now if you want to just jot down, what did my family teach me about grief? Or my faith, or my race, or my culture, or the media? You know, all of these inform these lenses through which we understand, and we need to be aware of them. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to jot down some thoughts. I'll tell you a couple of stories. Just checking time. So I grew up in a working class Irish Catholic family in Winnipeg. I'm a prairie girl at heart. My first death was when I was 5 years old. My Aunt Molly died. And so my parents just, I guess they had been taught it was okay for kids to be involved in death and grief. So I give credit to them. They took my sister and I to the viewing because I was Catholic. So it was at a church, and, you know, there was Aunt Molly in the casket, and it was an open casket, and Mom walked us up the aisle and we had to kiss her goodbye. And, you know, it was all a bit weird, but it was kind of normal, you know, and then there were all these prayers and rituals that we followed. You know, the funeral had a certain rhythm to it. And then, of course, we had the good old-fashioned Irish wake where I watched all the adults get drunk and tell funny stories. And so that was my sort of exposure. And though I am now, I consider myself a recovering Catholic, but I have many, many different ways of understanding and making meaning in the world. I'm deeply spiritual. I am grateful for those early teachings because they really normalized death and grief for me. But one of the things that I, you know, continually, I love this work because I'm always learning, but one of the things, it was around the time I started working at BFO, I think, this was many, many years ago. And I was having lunch with a friend of mine who had just gotten a big promotion at work. And she said, you know, I'm really sad that my dad's not here to see it. You know, he had died like a few years before. And I said, oh, Robin, don't worry. Your dad knows, and he's proud. He's looking down on you, and he's so proud of you. And she looked at me and she said, my dad is worm food. And I was like, what? And I realized, that I had said these words that I thought were so comforting because they were based on what I experienced. I learned young, that whoever dies before me is my guardian angel and they're looking down on me. And so, of course, I was like, of course, your dad is proud of you from wherever he is. And she was like, yeah, I don't really believe that. And it was such a gift for me. And I think about that all the time. And it was so unconscious that I'm constantly reminding myself to ask the question, what's making up these lenses? Because I'm going to meet people who have very different lenses than I do. And not all of them are going to be as gracious as my friend Robin was. So, as we talk about these core competencies in providing good service, cultural humility is a vital part of what we bring really to every encounter with another human being. And if you don't know the term, cultural humility is a lifelong practice of self-reflection and learning that really helps people to understand and respect cultures that are different from their own. And it really involves acknowledging one's own biases and limitations and working to create respectful and inclusive relationships with others. Cultural humility is different than cultural competence because it focuses on self-humility rather than trying to sort of achieve a level of knowledge or awareness about a culture to which one doesn't belong. So, there's a great TED talk. I should have put it in the link, but Chimamanda Adichie talks about the power of a single story, and the idea that lots of times when I'm doing training with volunteers, about grief, they'll say, "But when are we going to learn how Muslims grieve, or how do Jewish people grieve?" And I always say, look, you can research that till the end of the earth, and people have written books about these things. But when you go in to meet with someone and they're grieving and ahead of time they're Jewish or they're Muslim or they're Chinese or whatever, and you go in and you've got that file drawer in your head that you open and you say, oh, I know how Jewish people grieve. I'm set. I'm good to go. That's really an old school way of thinking about it. It's more about, in this moment, can I bring my humble curiosity to this encounter? And can I come into this encounter not making assumptions and not telling a story? Because let me tell you, I'm Catholic, recovering Catholic, but there's a lot of different ways to be Catholic in the world. And so you would not at all be prepared to sit with me if you thought, oh, I know a Catholic person, I can, I'll be able to support Betty Ann. No, you won't. But if you are being exquisitely present with me and listening for my unique story, and recognizing, cultural humility also talks about recognizing power imbalances. And, that's really important in the relationship of I'm a helper and you're the helpee, right? So there's an inherent power imbalance, even in peer relationships, right? You're coming to me for support. So that kind of puts me at an advantage, and cultural humility helps me to remember to keep us on the same wavelength. I read somewhere recently that it's the difference between I'm curious about who you are and I know who you are already. And so it's letting the person know that you're not the expert, they're the expert in their own lives. And I think that's part of what allows us to truly provide that person-centered care. So we go into more detail in the resource about that. So we're going to do another little exercise. So get your notebooks out or your iPhones. So I want you to think about a time, like a very specific time, when you have felt supported by someone. So a friend, a colleague, a family member, when you've been talking about a loss experience or when you've been grieving. What are the concrete things that that person said or did that helped you to feel supported? And really think about, their actions, their body language, the language that they use, the tone of their voice. And just jot down a few notes on that. And then maybe you can think about what are some of the things that people have done or said that don't help you feel supported. I mean, if you can think of an example, that's great, but just generally, what are things that people do and say, not so supportive? And so from that, I want you to imagine you are in the role of a helper and you're sitting with a grieving senior. What actions might you take to help them feel supported? How would you assist a grieving senior? And do you notice any thoughts about, you know, what you think would be normal for someone who's older to be grieving? Or how they should be grieving? So I'll just put out the invitation. Oh, Janet, brilliant.
Yeah, I thought I'd share. I was reading a book last evening, and there was a lot of interactions between the younger generations and, someone who had lost a child, and they were older. And, when you asked the question, what came up for me was being by their side, just, just letting them know that we're present, um, and, asking, if they mind that we're by their side, because a lot of people may mind that we're by their side. And so that's the first asking of permission, but letting them know that we're present. And it may just be in silence.
Beautiful.
And that if something occurs, something occurs, but they know that there's a presence. And, if they are particularly in their isolation phase, that itself, if they allow you to be there, then that's a blessing, actually, just to allow you in.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Janet. Patricia.
Hi. So I spent a few years working in retirement living and working with seniors. And a lot of them were widows. And my experience was they actually liked when we it wasn't grief avoidance, it was the opposite. And so they were very happy to speak um, about their loved one. And it wasn't, a faux pas. So in my experience in dealing with seniors who were widows, the fact that I would take time and listen to them and ask about their loved one that was no longer there made them happy as opposed to made them sad.
I love that, Patricia. And so let me ask, was there sort of an unspoken thing that you kind of went in with that we shouldn't bring up a loved one, but then you learn from them that in fact that they wanted it?
Um, I didn't approach this um with rules. It was more of a feeling.
Awesome.
There were no rules. Yeah.
I love it.
They get to know you and it's a relationship. And anyways, my experience is that they weren't afraid of death. And of course it depends on the the place they're at, one is at in their grief, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was kind of nice. I too grew up in a Roman Catholic. I like your recovering
Recovering
Catholic. I
Catholic.
like that. I like that a lot. You know, one of my very first memories is a couple of neighbors actually had their spouse in the home for the wake, you know, and this was very common in the 60s. And I remember that. And so I kind of grew up not, death was not an avoidance thing. And I think that was very good for me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Patricia. One of the greatest gifts that I received early on in my work was, you know, the idea of someone being reticent to bring up our loved one. I would have someone say to me, well, I know Mother's Day is coming up and, you know, I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to remind you of your loss. And I said, hey, newsflash, I know my mother's dead 24 hours a day. Like, I never forget that she's gone. And so it's actually really a gift to have someone ask, how are you doing with Mother's Day coming up? And can you tell me about your mom? And for sure, working at BFO, you know, I worked with some amazing bereaved parents who, you know, were just like hungry for someone to say, tell me about your child, and use their name and talk about them on their birthday. And, you know, when it was September and everyone else was, you know, bringing their kids back to school, like to reach out and say, hey, how are you doing today? Really just so important to that acknowledgement piece. Larry.
My experience with working with seniors, the feeling of being invisible, of being useless. I found that the best way that I could help in that environment was, as we've all said already, is just being there and listen to them. Let them tell their story. Let them tell how maybe a little bit of wisdom from what they've done in their lives, and listen to them so that they're not feeling useless or invisible, because that's the biggest thing that I see is they say I'm invisible. Nobody looks at me. I walk down the side, nobody looks at me. They don't care about me. Even though they've lost somebody, that is important, but it's important for us to be able to see them and hear them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Larry. Love it. So this is, Barbara.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because I have a 91-year-old father-in-law, and he's lost both his sons within 15 months of each other, and also his wife. And I find with him, he just wants to reminisce. He just wants to talk. He just wants to tell stories. Do you remember the time when Ken did this? Do you remember the time when Dave did that? Do you remember the time when you and Sonia drank a whole bottle of wine together? Like, just he wants to tell the stories, and he's happy to tell the stories. And I think that's probably the most important thing that I've found. And he's not, you know, I had two grandmothers that were both widows, and that's all they wanted to ever do was just tell stories about their life together with their husbands.
Yeah.
Or their spouses, or better halves, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'll echo kind of what's been being said.
Yeah.
I don't have experience in the community with that, but I definitely have experience with family members, older family members, and that's all they want to do is just talk.
Well, and what a gift for your father-in-law that you are willing and able to sit and sacredly receive those stories, because we know storytelling is such an important part of integrating grief in a healthy way. And you know, some of the newer models that are talked about, you know, are about continuing bonds, right? And maintaining those connections to people who've died. And that's exactly what he wants to do with his sons and with his wife. So what a beautiful thing that you're there. Thank you, Barbara.
No problem.
So I have a short video I want to share. And I don't know if some of you may have seen this. It's really illustrates the purpose and power of acknowledgement in grief. It's on YouTube, so there might be some annoying ad when I first roll it, so apologies for that.
I took two things that I love, dancing and dogs, and I made them into a
least it's
successful business.
About dogs.
Hi,
not
I'm Ronnie.
offensive.
Efforts to help somebody feel better.
There we go.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary, everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up, but here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
So what do people think of that? What is there anything that stood out for you about that video? Larry.
What stood out for me is, I'm always trying to fix it. I'm always trying to fix it. So just with my knowledge that you have instilled in me over the years and long, long time ago, the importance of being able just to listen is my takeaway.
Yeah, you can't heal someone's pain by trying to take it away from them. That's one of the quotes that really jumped out for me the first time I saw that video. Anyone relate to the rainbow pooping bunny? Do you have friends and family that like to poop rainbows? Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. So when my spouse passed away, I've always been known as a bon vivant, and my friends just wanted me to return back to who I was prior to that, not understanding that I had changed forever. I mean, between you and I over time, I did get back to where I was, but a little different. I like the word acknowledgement. If I may, I'd also like to add the word validation.
Yes.
I found in my grief journeys, the not listening or trying to change the person, it feels like invalidation. It feels like your experience isn't real. And top of changing that as well is those people that say, oh, you think you have it bad, but the neighbor two doors down, their life is way worse than yours. They didn't lose a spouse, they lost their whole family. And it, for me, it's that yes, that's awful for them, but it doesn't change the grief. It goes a bit to the point you said at the beginning of the session where people are comparing griefs, but I think people do it not noticing that they're doing it, or they have the best intentions when they're doing it as well.
Yeah, it's the pooping bunny, right? At least you didn't. And we talk about that in the resource, that just get rid of any sentence that starts with at least. Just take that right out of your vocabulary and you'll be fine. Thank you for sharing, Eric.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything
also-
stand out for you in that?
I just wanted to say that there's some stuff in the chat as well from Khadija and Barbara.
Thank you. Can you share that?
Absolutely. So Khadija shared, excellent video. Thanks. Non-judgmental validation is crucial in trauma. And Barbara mentioned acknowledgement was the first thing that I wrote for support. So thank you both.
Great. All right. So something else that we touch on in the resource is something called the GRACE model of compassionate response, which Dr. Darcy Harris came up with. I see some of you nodding, so you're familiar with it. Again, this is a framework that you can use for compassionate grief response. And, you know, I love acronyms. They help me remember things. So GRACE, gather your thoughts and attention. R, recall your intention. A, attune to yourself and others. C, consider what will serve, and E, engage and end. So we kind of go through that model a little bit and give people some more information about how they can hold space for someone. And then, as I said earlier, you know, a really important part of the learning resource includes talking about self-care. And, you know, as workers and carers, I'm sure that we have all heard the oxygen mask analogy of self-care, you know, the instruction that the flight attendants give during the safety demonstration. We're supposed to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first for a reason. And, you know, it's hard to do. It's sometimes antithetical to our nature, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So, you know, unless you keep your cup filled, unless you keep yourself well, you're going to be no good to other people. So, you know, I talk about self-care as not optional. This isn't an add-on. This isn't, oh yeah, and by the way, this is a vital part of being a good service provider. And, you know, that building that muscle of, you know, resilience and self-care is ongoing, right? It's a skill that we have to develop and maintain. You know, you don't just go to the gym once and, you know, get great abs, right? I'm so bad with like gym analogies, but I know some people relate to them. You know, you have to go every day, right? You don't go to learn how to play tennis, take one lesson and you're, you know, Martina Navratilova. Okay, I've just totally like aged myself. So it's something that you need to develop and maintain as much as the skill of being a good listener and ensuring humility, cultural humility and care. Yes, Marley.
So this take care of yourself first. I'm a senior. My mother has been suffering with dementia for over 20 years. And I finally figured out the self-care component because I would go every weekend to feed her in a nursing home. And every weekend I'd come home and I'd lie in the bed and I'd cry and I'd fall asleep. Now I have grandchildren for the past few years, and I thought, how am I going to take care of myself and not do this? It's like beating myself up every time. I don't want to stop going to see her. So I came up with the bookend idea. I bookended the visit with something joyous, a movie with a friend, a coffee, my grandchildren, something that would lift me again. I mean, I didn't know how long she would live. She's still alive. And rather than cut off the visits, which I now do not beat myself up for if I can't make it every week, I do something that's joyful and uplifting. So it's not me putting myself first, but it's putting myself in good order, I guess. Thanks.
In good working order. I like that. I really like that, Marley. Thank you. Derek.
One of the things we encourage people to do when they're in grief is to seek out a support group. I'd like to suggest that each of us needs to be a member of a support group, a group that supports the supporters. We have one in Kingston. It's a place where you can get the kind of help that you can't get on your own.
I love that, Derek. Thank you. When I teach volunteers about the concept of holding space, I always say you can't become a good space holder unless you have a good space holder for yourself. So, go forth and designate your space holder. I literally tell people when, we finish our session tonight, I want you to call up your person and say, hey, just so you know, you're my space holder and this is what it means. So I love that, Derek. Thank you. So just a little more on self-care, the concept of holism. So just as we encourage you to see clients as whole human beings and recognize that, grief impacts people in all of their quadrants, we also encourage you to care for yourself in the same sort of holistic way. And so there's an Indian proverb that everyone is a house of 4 rooms: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And it suggests that most of us tend to live in one room most of the time, but unless we go into every room every day, even if only to keep it aired out, we're not complete. So I love that idea. So make sure you're going into all of your rooms and you're encouraging the people that you work with to go into their rooms as well. There is an exercise in the resource about encouraging people to reflect on what are some of the current and maybe new self-care strategies that they're going to implement. And I love that you've already shared a couple with us. So if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about self-care, now's the good time to do it. And maybe reach out to Derek and see if you can join his group virtually. Or maybe BFO-Toronto needs to start one.
Sadly, our group is not online. You'd have to travel to Kingston.
Okay. That's so old school, Derek, actually being in person. How wonderful. Thank you. So, I've said it a couple of times tonight. I think ultimately the greatest gift that we can bring to someone who is grieving is our exquisite presence. And you've also reflected that back. And so that's why I really like to emphasize the idea that being is doing. When I train volunteers and they say to me, oh, like, Betty Ann, this is all great and well and good, but like, what am I supposed to do with someone? And I realize like, oh, the being is the doing. I'm teaching you how to be. That is what you need to do. And so I think maybe the expression, don't just sit there, do something, should be changed to don't just do something, sit there. And I think that is especially important when we're talking about being with people that are grieving. So the end of the resource wraps up with an invitation for people who've worked their way through the modules and the workbook to actually spend a few minutes getting grounded. And this is maybe something that you're familiar with if you facilitate groups at BFO. We always talk about making sure that we leave things well. Sometimes, coming into a space, whether it's a support group or a learning space like tonight, and we've taken the lid off and opened up to some of our grief, it's important to spend a few minutes kind of making sure that we've packed ourselves back up before we go back out into the world. So I'm going to invite you to practice this, because it's going to be important for you to find ways to close your time with your clients. And it's important to close this learning experience. So, get your notebook again and just spend a couple of minutes reflecting on how you would ground yourself in whatever quadrant you feel needs attention in this moment. So again, it's that muscle of self-awareness, like physically, like, do I need to maybe go for a walk? Or, oh, I'm parched, I haven't been drinking enough water. Am I feeling really tender? Do I need to do some self-compassion? Is this stirred up my, questions of meaning and connection? And maybe I need to do some journaling, or maybe I need to call a friend. Whatever you think would be helpful to close this experience, you can take a few minutes and write that down. So would anyone like to share any of their strategies for caring for yourself or getting grounded in any of your quadrants? Eric.
So I think for me, this particular technique touches all four of them, and that's caring for my dog. So I find I will go for a walk. It's typically what I do after co-facilitating a grief group as well. I find the contact with her helps with my mental and emotional state. Going outside helps with the physical, and the connection with something other than myself helps with the spiritual.
That's so beautiful. Dogs are just the greatest gift. They're such, I share custody of a dog with a friend of mine, and he's on his way over now. And I find that they're very good at co-regulation. So if I can hold him he's a lap dog. If I can hold him, he slows me down and yeah, takes some of that pressure off. So what kind of dog do you have, Eric?
I don't know, the lighting's not very good, but this is Pebbles. She's a Pomsky.
Oh, what a sweetie pie. Hi.
Hi, Pebbles.
I gotta say, this has been the best part of Zoom for me these last 5 years, is getting to meet everyone's animals. Their cats come across the screen, their dogs show up. Thank you, Eric.
You're
Any
welcome.
other sharings about how you will ground yourself? Janet.
Thank you, Eric. for those of us who aren't dog lovers, I really agree with just getting outside, breathing fresh air, just well, I'm repeating myself, being outside to me is hugely grounding and also very satisfying. And sometimes, if the weather is such, just even for me, I live in an apartment, so just even going out on my balcony, I find hugely helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Janet. Anyone else? Derek.
Out of curiosity, how much of the work that is done by the group is in person, and how much by telephone, by Zoom, or some other means?
I think it's different for every affiliate. I think some affiliates have in-person one-on-ones and in-person groups, and others have Zoom and telephone. Ashley, did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we have about 9 groups running, and 2 of those groups are in person, and the rest are online. And all of our intakes we do over the phone. Sometimes people aren't really comfortable with phone calls, so we work with people, to see if they have any accessibility needs, or sometimes we'll do things over Zoom. So it really depends on, but mostly through phone calls at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Janet.
Here in Ottawa, same kind of format. There are in-person programs, there are Zoom programs, and there are also group walks, if you want to, in different parts of the city. And I don't know about phone calls. Most recently, after one particular group that I was shadowing the facilitators with, there was one person in the group who was particularly, like, really very upset. And one of the facilitators mentioned that she had in fact phoned this person afterwards, in 1 or 2 previous sessions that she attended. So certainly phoning is part of it. In person is wonderful. There's something to be said for being able to, look at somebody, look at their eyes, look at their face. But given, especially we're just hopefully at the tail end, well, not tail end, but we're getting to the end of winter, or just for those that aren't comfortable driving at night, Zoom is a godsend. Zoom has been one.
Thank you. Ashley, is there anything in the chat? Any responses to grounding?
Yes, we've got some lovely comments. A few people have had to leave, but they've thanked you for this presentation. And, getting to learn something like this on an ongoing basis is helpful. So yes, our e-learning module will be available online very soon. We are working on it. We're not very tech savvy and very short-staffed, but we are definitely getting this out there. And so it's something that will be available always. And Oh,
So-
and Evelyn shared that she has a corner in her house and it has pictures of her grandparents that she's lost over the years. She likes to light a candle in their memory each evening and share a prayer. It helps her move forward with the grief, feels grounded and still feels connected to them. And so she'll be doing this as well this evening. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Janet.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and I may have missed this in the beginning now that I'm in into the presentation. This resource, is it available? How will it become available to us? So, through BFO Ottawa individually, like, what is the plan?
So I'm going to talk about that at the end. If you're okay to just hold for one more moment, Janet. Anything more about grounding before we move on?
Larry has shared that he loves to cook
Ah, beautiful.
and make the food of the person that he's lost.
Yes,
Mm.
I love that. Combining good self-care and grounding with legacy work. I'm going to share one very quick grounding technique that some of you may have not heard. I learned it from a shiatsu practitioner. So it's a real thing. So shiatsu, if you don't know, is about, very loosely a practice that helps you tend to the your chakras and your energy centers in your body. And so when you think about if you're not grounded, you're feeling anxious, you're kind of floaty, you're not like rooted, right? So the idea of grounding is about pulling your energy down into your root. And your root chakra is basically at the base of your spine. So this shiatsu practitioner teaches a technique called clenching, which is exactly what you think it is. Clenching your butthole. You're all doing it now, aren't you? Yep. And nobody sees you doing it. It's just a private little thing that you can do. Take a deep breath, do a little clenching, and that brings your energy right down to your root chakra. So clench away. I can't believe this is actually in a video that's going on the website, but there you go. Clenching. All right. Now we can wrap up. I want to just say a couple of things. Thank you for being here tonight and taking the time out of your busy lives to attend this presentation. Ashley will be following up once the learning resource is on the website. So this was, again, just a little bit of a taste of some of the information that'll be shared. It's currently being converted into e-learning modules, which are self-directed. They will be loaded onto the website along with the workbook and resources. And so there'll be a big sort of celebration and email that'll go out to all the different affiliates when it's up and running and ready to be accessed. I hope that you found the session helpful. And, if this is a resource that you want to share with other people, that's great. We want it to get out there as wide as possible. Ashley, is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of practical follow-ups? And then I'll just open it up if there's any questions or comments, and you can pop a note into the chat if you want and let us know if you found the session helpful or any questions that you have.
I really just want to say thank you, Betty Ann, for your labor of love and doing this presentation, helping with the content, and truly bringing your whole being into this work and into today and beyond. And this is going to be, and we spoke about this before, but this is going to be a legacy that will remain with BFO, because we are moving into a very different, technologically evolving, something is happening with BFO, and I love that I get to be a part of it, and I'm really very happy that all of you were here to share this with us, and I can't wait to get this out there, and we are working on it amidst all the hats that we all wear, but I truly hope that we have this out in the next couple of weeks, and then everyone that registered for this event tonight will get the copy of the recording, any links that we need to provide, and all of that information will be sent to you as soon as the recording is made available, and all of it again will be on our website. So we will let you know, and we'll put it in our newsletter as well. So thank you so much for your time, your presence, your participation, your thoughts, your words, your experiences, your reflections. Everything is always going to be etched, not only in the video because it was recorded, but in all of our hearts. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.